Thank you, Carl, for reading that message this morning. And before I actually get into the message, I want to talk about how we're going to spend these next 2 weeks. We're actually going to today focus on what we just sang about, coming home to God, the response from God when we come home to Him, even as sinners and even as non-perfect people, as we all are. We're going to see through that scripture that Carl just read, the response that's waiting for us, how far we can get away, how far this son got away from God, how he literally lost himself, he lost his identity, yet God still accepted him back, and we'll see how deeply he loved him and how much compassion he had for him, and how he not only accepted him back in love, but he accepted him back and restored him. He made him into something new. He didn't leave him as the broken person that he was. That whole theme of God, this unconditional, compassionate love, has really been the theme of these past few months, this past season of my life as I go through this first full-time semester at Evangelical at seminary. And this passage came up often in actually all of my classes, I think multiple times. So it's really been speaking to me. It's a beautiful illustration. Even if you just take it at face value and you just read it, it's famous throughout the entire world, not just the Christian world, because again, just at surface value, there's a lot of beauty there. A son that leaves his father and wastes his wealth and then comes back and the father accepts him. But there's things in there that us, even we might miss because of a few factors. Just the language factor, it's in a different language than what Jesus was using, and things might get lost in translation. It's a different time frame we live in. We don't live it's been 2,000 years since Jesus told this parable, and he was putting things in for his audience. Jesus was the master storyteller, and he really drives his point home by using things that would have resonated with the audience, and those things without really taking the time to study them, they might not resonate with us as much because we don't live in that time and we don't live under the Jewish law. So that's what we're going to try to look to today. We're going to look this week at the youngest son, and then next week we'll look at the oldest son from this parable. So a little mini sermon series. And I think there's 3 points that Jesus really drives home in this, 3 main points. He drives home how far the son is, how it's much more than he just left his father and did some bad things and lost his wealth. He literally lost himself. And then we see how he turns back and how God, and the Father is obviously the illustration for God, how God accepts him back fully and unconditionally in love, and then how he restores him. I think that's the 3rd point, how fully he restores him and makes him into something new. So that's how we're going to hopefully spend the time today. But before that, before we do that, I want to talk about something that's been going on at the Bills household this past few years. In the past few years, we've become a little bit of a cat sanctuary, if you will. We've kind of become, the Bills household has become the cat haven of Narbonne. And we started out with one cat. I think she was a female. Well, she is a female for sure. But I think maybe the neighbor left her out, and she was friendly, and we felt bad for her. So we started feeding her. And as cats do in the wild, she multiplied and had two litters. And but today I want to talk about one particular cat from the litter. His name is Ernie. Now Ernie and his litter, he was the runt of the family, of his litter. He was the smallest. He's the most tepid of his family. He was the most easily scared. He was the most standoffish. And he's really sweet, but like I said, he wanted to stay away. He was unsure of everything, easily scared. And Ernie also, he has this really sad meow, and it's really almost kind of pathetic sounding. And all these things make Ernie kind of has a special place in your heart. And the other thing about Ernie is he's a wanderer. He's a searcher. He doesn't stick at home. Most of the cats, they stay pretty close to home. Even the mom, she goes on her hunting trips and she'll bring back a mouse and leaves it at the back door for all of us to see. But for the most part, they know that they have it pretty good and they stay pretty close to home other than some day trips. But Ernie, he'll disappear for days, and I think there's been times when he's disappeared for weeks. And actually, I forgot. I have a picture here if this comes up quickly. This is actually rare. This is just from this week. It shows you what's going on with the cats on top of my truck. We decided to sleep there. that was just this week, so I figured I'd put that in there. And then this is, maybe not. There we go. That's little Ernie there. That's his, that's him in the middle of his little sad meow, and that's just him there. He's a little guy still, even though he's fully grown. But that's Ernie. He actually returned this week so I could get that picture, which was nice. But that's what's going on there. And most of the cats, like I said, they stay pretty close to home. But Ernie's a wonder. He's searching, and he'll go for days at a time. And we obviously don't have any knowledge of where Ernie is, and we wonder where he's at, and hope that he's okay. And we're always happy when he returns, and he's in fact actually been dubbed kind of around the house the prodigal. We can say when he returns, the prodigal has returned. So Ernie is the wonder, and because of all those things, Ernie has a special place in our heart. And even though his wondering may make us love him even more, and we accept him when he comes back, and we're just happy to see him. We don't really scold him for running away. And we just feed him and give him a place to sleep it off before he goes on his next adventure. He's the wonder. And I think for each of us in our lives, I tell this story because we all start out searching for something, a little bit like Ernie. We have a little bit of Ernie in us. We start off wondering for something. And I don't think we have to, it may not be physical wondering, it may not go from place to place, more of a spiritual wondering or an emotional wondering or a relational wondering. And I think as a church, we don't need to spend much time on it, but we know each of us are looking for God. We're looking for God's approval and his love for us. We're looking for the Creator's approval. And people may not know that, or they may not want to admit that, but that's what all of us long for in our lives, because he is our Creator. We long for his love, and we long to be a part of him. And in this parable, Jesus gives us God's response to our wandering, to a runner, to a searcher, no matter how many bad decisions he makes in his running. That's what Luke 15, this passage we're going to look at, is all about. A guy who, through his searching and through his wandering away from the Father, through his wandering away from God, he's absolutely at the pit of life. He's all the way at rock bottom. And Jesus goes into great detail here to show us that. And hopefully we're going to try to pull out how far in the pits he was and how deeply God loved him once he returned him, and the response that God gives all of us, no matter how far we wandered away from him. And just before we actually look to the text, it's important to keep in mind Jesus' audience for the illustration, which were mostly Jews and Pharisees. So people that knew the Jewish law and were living under the Jewish law. And Jesus knew this, and he puts a lot in there to drive home his points. And I'm going to try to pull some of those things out for us today as we go through this text and highlight what it means for us in 2019. So with that, we'll look to verse 11, verse 11, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons." And on the surface, that verse seems pretty basic, a pretty basic beginning to a story or one of Jesus' parables or illustrations. But even in that, there's a great depth to it if you understand what preceded it. Jesus before this had just got done telling 2 other parables that had the same theme that we're going to see here in Luke 15. Someone losing something of value and then someone finding it. What happens when that lost thing of value is found? But the difference between this and the first two parables, one was the lost sheep and then the other one was the lost coin, is sheep and coins also, they have value, but they're limited value. You can put a number easily on a coin and a sheep. But by Jesus using a man with 2 sons, he's raising the stakes, if you will. You can't put a value on human life. You can't put a value on family, on sons and daughters and fathers and mothers. Basically, at this point, Jesus has told 2 parables highlighting the same thing. I assume that he sensed that his audience wasn't getting it, so now he's going to raise the stakes. He was done tiptoeing, and he's going to go right in and say, this is what happens when you're lost before God. This is what happens when you wander, when you run away, and this is the response that's waiting for you when you turn around and come back towards God. So that's the significance of verse 11. And then verse 12, it says, the younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So the father divided his estate between them. So the youngest son asked for his son's inheritance while the son is still alive. And I think we can see that there's a level of insult in that even in our society today, because probably none of us are going to would have asked for our parents' inheritance while they were still alive, and we wouldn't expect our children to do the same. But this was an even deeper insult in this time because of the customs that they lived under. In Jesus' time frame, first of all, a Jewish youngest son, which was who was asking for this, they would receive about a third of everything. The oldest son would of course, get more. And when I say everything, that literally means everything. That's the cash of the father, land, that's flock. That's the entirety of the father's estate. So for the son to receive this, things would need to be sold off. His flocks, his sheep, everything would need to be cashed out. Obviously a huge loss for the father, a huge embarrassment for the father, because what the son was basically saying here in this custom by asking for his inheritance, he's saying, Father, I can no longer wait for you to die. All I want from you is your wealth, and I'm tired of waiting for you to pass away to get it. That you're as good to me alive as dead, as long as I have your wealth. And that obviously we can see that is an absolute huge slap in the face for the father, for any father. And it shows us the kind of slap in the face that we do to God when we run away from him. And Jesus would have known, Jesus' audience would have known also what the permitted response in this time could have been from a father to a rebellious son like this. You don't have to turn there, but Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 21 tells us what could happen, what the likely response to a rebellious son could be, is they could be taken out of the city and stoned and killed for this type of rebellion. And I'm sure Jesus' audience was thinking, this is where this story was going to go. There was going to be some sort of punishment for this disobedient son. Judgment was going to be served in their eyes. Yet this is the first instance in the story where Jesus goes the complete opposite direction of what his audience and what we may think is the proper outcome. Jesus goes the absolute opposite direction, and he also here gives us the first glimpse into the true heart and into the love of God that he has for us. That he gives us free will. He gives us free choice. He doesn't force himself upon us. We can run away from him if we choose, and we can also turn back to him like the son eventually is going to choose. Because the father here, he doesn't object. He obliges to the son's request. He sells off his estate, and he divides it between both sons. Because remember that both sons got their inheritance. That'll be important for next week. So both sons get their inheritance, and the youngest son is included. And verse 13 tells us that not long after that, the youngest son gets together all that he had, and he sets off for a distant country. So it doesn't take him long. He takes what he wanted from his dad, his wealth, and he says, peace out, Dad, I'm out of here. I'll see you when I see you. I'm off to bigger and better things, I'm sure is what's on his mind. And when Jesus here says that he set off for a distant country, this is much more than just a geographic move, which we can read on the surface. Jesus here is saying that the son was moving to a different way of life. He's moving to a place with a different way of life. He's leaving everything behind. He's going to a place of different morals, different standards of living, different customs than what he's used to. He's leaving everything that made him who he is behind. In our day, the move would be similar to moving from where we're at today, pretty conservative, Lancaster County, and then moving right into the heart of Las Vegas, where there's obviously places to squander your wealth and possibly your life away there on every corner. The son was leaving everything behind, his family and just everything behind. And this is also where that term, the prodigal son, this story is widely known as the story of the prodigal son. That's where that comes from. It's not in the NIV that we read, but it is in the New King James. And that literally means reckless spendthrift. So the son takes everything his father has, goes to this foreign land, leaves everything behind him. He just blows the entirety of his wealth recklessly there on all sorts of things. You can use your imagination on the things that he was doing. He blows the entirety of his inheritance. And he's left penniless in this foreign country. Pretty bad situation, but verse 14, Jesus tells us that it continues to get worse for the son. Now not only has he gone off to this foreign land, but there comes this severe famine in the land, and that would have been something that would have resonated deeply with Jesus' audience, because it would have been one of their greatest fears, because in a famine, of course, not only do you lack the opportunity to gain any abundance in your wealth, but you're probably going to lack the opportunity and miss out on some basic necessities in life. And in our day, it would be the comparison to a depression, and we might lack the opportunity just to get the things that we survive. And I think Jesus did this. Again, he's continuing to drive home the point that this guy is losing everything. He's losing everything that made him who he was, that there's so much more that he just recklessly spent his money and left his father behind. And things continue to get worse. In verse 15, Jesus was not ready to show us how the son came out of this pit, and he was continuing to drive that point home. Verse 15 says, the son is in such desperate straits that he hires himself out to a citizen of this foreign land so that he can feed this foreigner's pigs. And now I think we can see that none of us are jumping at the bit probably to take a job feeding pigs. So that we can see that this is a bad moment for the son, but there's an even greater depth here for the son. And this is another example of Jesus showing this son losing his identity, losing who he was, because remember, he was raised Jewish, and to this day, Jews and pigs don't exactly mix too well together. They don't get along. They're unclean animals, and they're taught to avoid them. So Jesus here is showing us the depths this guy is going, how he is so far gone. He's lost the basic ability to feed himself, and because of that, he's lost his ability in his religion, and he's taken this job feeding these unclean animals. Jesus is showing us this guy is at rock bottom. He's as far away from God as you can get. In 16, it continues to get lost. He's already lost any identity he's had in his family, in the place that he's grown up, in his father, in God. In the illustration, he's lost his identity in God. He's also lost any identity he would have in his wealth. He's lost his identity he would have in his religion. He's feeding unclean animals. And I touched on it a minute ago. Now he's lost his identity. Just in one of the things that make us human beings is we long to be food. That's one of our basic necessities. And he's lost the ability to even take care of that, because it says that he longed to fill his stomach so much that he wanted to take the food that he was feeding to the pigs. That's how buried in the pit of his mistakes and his decision and his wandering and his searching this son was. And Jesus makes it abundantly clear that this man has completely lost his ways, completely lost himself, and he's sinking quickly into the pit of his past if he continues to wander and search and not turn back to the Father, not turn back to God, which is what we're really seeing in the illustration. And the son is at the pit of misery, and you might feel like you're at that place today, absolutely at the pit, of far away from God as you think you can get, just smothered in the weight of your mistakes, or maybe you've been there before in your past. You feel like you've completely lost your identity. You don't know who, or you don't remember what you are, or if your life has value, or because things have just gone so bad, you're wondering, and your running has caused you to completely lose yourself and lose your way. But this is the great thing about this passage, is verse 17 is where Jesus shows us how far the son has fallen, and in verse 17 he shows us how he begins to come out of that pit as well, and it shows us how we can start to come out of that pit if we feel like we're there today as well, and how deeply we are loved by God, and how he greets us when we come to him. Verse 17 says, when he came to his senses, when the son came to his senses, he said to himself, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, yet here I am starving to death? And the importance in this first phrase is critical. When he came to his senses, could really be more accurately translated, when he came to himself. That's, again, proving what I was saying, is this guy has lost himself. He's lost his right mind. He's lost the ability to see his identity. He's lost his identity. And in other words, it's saying when he came back into his right mind, when he had gathered himself back together, when he began to realize the error of his ways and realize that he needed to turn back to the Father. And I think he's showing us what the beginning of repentance looks like. And I say beginning of repentance because as I studied for this sermon this week, I came across historian Kenneth Bailey's take on it. And if you look at the Son's word in verse 18, he says, I have sinned against heaven and against you. And this is just interesting. I never read this before, so I thought I would share it, and I'll give my take on what Jesus may be saying here. But he draws the comparison to verse 18. He says, I have sinned against heaven and against you, against the Father. And if you compare that to Pharaoh's words used when Moses is trying to lead Israel out of Egypt, they're in close comparison. That's found in Exodus chapter 9, verse 27, and then again in chapter 10, verse 16, if you want to look at it yourself. Pharaoh also says that he has sinned against God. Yet we know in that instance that Pharaoh literally didn't have it all figured out. He wasn't really truly repentant because he goes back on his word. And as I prayed over that and just thought about it, what Jesus, if he did draw us back to those words, what he might be saying there. And I think what it could be showing us is that we might not just have this moment where we have everything truly figured out, where we truly have figured out God, and we truly figured out who we are. And that can be tough, and it can be an important lesson for us as a people who are programmed in a time that we want everything in an instant. We want everything done yesterday. We want to come to God and we expect him to show us and enlighten us to who we are and who he is, and we just have everything figured out and life come back posed perfectly from there on. But we all know that that's not the case. That's not what coming to God is about. In fact, the Bible says that to expect the opposite, to expect tough trials when you come to God. And I think Jesus is showing us here the lesson we can take from that. He's saying that this son maybe didn't have everything 100% figured out. He didn't have everything calculated out in his mind. But he made the important decision that we all have to make. Is we have to decide whether we're going to continue to wander away from God or if we're going to come back to him and accept his love and then figure it out as we go in life. I think that's what Jesus could be teaching us here by if he is saying that this son literally didn't have it all figured out just in a moment. I think that can be an important lesson for us in our day. I think he's saying that it's more about your destination, who you're wandering through, who you're wandering to. And even though we might not have it all figured out, might not have it all together, God is still going to greet us like we're about to see with this type of love. Even in our imperfection, it shows us don't waste time trying to get your life together before coming to God, because you're never going to get there. You're never going to be without imperfection. Come to God as he is, just like the son did. He came to God just as he was. He came to the Father just as he was. And in verse 20, that's where we begin to see this love portrayed. The love portrayed from the Father to the Son. Is the love that God betrays on us, even in our imperfection. And as the son begins this journey back to his father, I'm sure he has to be going through his mind and rehearsing in his mind what his apology would sound like, maybe a list of excuses. And we also see that it's going through his mind, he's just hoping to be accepted back as a hired servant. He's not even thinking about being accepted back as a son. He thinks he's lost that opportunity to be called a son, which, remember what Deuteronomy 21 verses 18 through 21 says, he was really right by every standard. He should have been rejected by the son and only had hoped to gain the lowest place in the family, which was a higher servant, because there was actually 3 levels of servant in this time frame. There was the bond servant. They were the highest, if you will. They were treated almost like the family. They were given some responsibility. Then there were just regular servants. They were treated pretty well, but they were the ones that were doing most of the work. And then there were what the son was hoping to be. There was the higher servants. These were the lowliest of the low. They had no respect. They were hired and fired at will without much consideration. They were the lowliest position in the family. And that we see is all the son was hoping for. He's just hoping to be the lowliest position in the family so he can have his basic needs provided for. And that's what probably, I think a lot of people think they can be, that they don't think they can be accepted back to God in love because of their past. Just like the son, they're like, I can never be called a son or a father, or son or a daughter. Because of my past, God would never accept me back in this loving way. But verse 20 and the rest of this passage shows us that you really couldn't be more wrong if you think that way. Verse 20 says that while the son was still a long way off, he was still a long way from reaching home, from reaching where he thought his father would be. Yet the father sees him, and he comes running toward him, and he was filled with what? With what we would expect: anger, judgments, condemnation. No, again, Jesus shocks us here, and he tells us that the father ran to him and met him in compassion, and he throws his arms around him and kisses him. And it's before the son can even get a word out. And let's try to break down some of the depth of this reaction, the depth of this love. First of all, the Greek text of long way off, that indicates even more than what, I don't know what your image of this story is. My image was of the father sitting on the porch watching for the son to return, which in and of itself, that's pretty amazing. There's a lot of depth to that, the son or the father watching for us, God watching for us from his dwelling. But Jesus suggests here, in the language he uses, something even greater than that, and greater than God just watching from his dwelling place. He suggests that the father would actually leave his home, would leave his dwelling place to greet us, and to be able to have a vantage point so he could watch for his son, so he could see him as soon as possible if he returned home. And we know the illustration of that, or what that actually is. It's not an illustration. What God actually did, and what Jesus actually did in coming for us, is God actually left his dwelling place to be here with us. And that's the picture we see here of the Father, of God, literally desiring to be with us so much that he leaves his dwelling place to be with us, to be able to meet us where we are, so we can have a relationship. And it's beautifully portrayed here in the Father leaving his home and watching for the Son. And going even deeper and further into the reaction of the Father, it says that the Father runs to meet the Son. And for us, we can read that, and it's not that uncommon for men or anyone to run in this society, especially if you're seeing someone for the first time. You may run to them and greet them in love, but not in this time frame. No dignified man, no dignified father in this culture was going to run. It was not a dignified thing to do. Because just think about the wardrobe that they're wearing. I mean, it's a robe, and if you run, the robe will be flying every which way. Men did not run in this time. So this is another area of the depth of the love and the depth of the emotion that God has when we come back to him, that he would be willing to commit this undignified act to run. This is the depth of the love that God shows for us, and the kind of reaction that he shows for us when we return to him. And then you would think, and I would read this story and you think, there's still got to be an asterisk. You got to greet us in love and be happy for us to come back. But there's got to be, once he gets there and the emotion draws down, or the emotion calms down, there's got to be some sort of a slap on the wrist, some sort of a punishment for the son. He can't be fully reinstated, fully loved. But again, Jesus goes the complete opposite direction. He says the Father just throws his arms around him and kisses him. And again, the language here, our translation, we miss the depth of this love, because Jesus shows us the height of the emotion that the Father is feeling for the Son as he returns, and the height of the emotion, the passion of the emotion that God feels when we return to him. First of all, the traditional word used in the New Testament for kiss, I haven't had a language class yet, so I'll do my best I can. Phileo, P-H-I-L-E-O, which that would be just your average kiss on the cheek, or the kiss on the cheek greeting. I always think of French people. They always kiss each other on the cheek when they greet each other. That's what I think of. That's the traditional word used in the New Testament for kiss. But that is not the word that Jesus used here. He used kataphileo, K-A-T-A-P-H-I-L-E-O, which that's a kiss of a great emotion, a kiss of a great passion, a kiss that you would only pour out on one of your most loved companions. And the text literally says that the Father showers the Son with these type of passionate kisses. What a picture of God. that he is so longing for us to come home, that when we finally do, he's overcome with a type of joy